Hi guys, Mr. Ryan here. So today we're going to read from chapters 15 to 19 of Holes. Okay, so that is 31 to page 38 on the PDF. Joining us again, back from being rehired as Callie as co-teacher, so she'll be around. Alright, let's get started. Chapter 15. Mr. Pendanski filled the canteens. The warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup truck. She poked it through X-Ray's dirt pile to see if anything else might have been buried in it as well. After you drop off X-Ray, I want you to bring back 3 wheelbarrows, she said. X-Ray got in the pickup. As the truck pulled away, he leaned out the wide window and waved. "Zero," said the warden. "I want you to take over X-Ray's hole." She seemed to know that Zero was the fastest digger. "Armpit and Squid, you will keep digging where you have been," she said. "But you're each going to have a helper. Zigzag, you help Armpit. Magnet will help Squid. And Caveman, you'll work with Zero. We're going to dig the dirt twice. Zero will dig it out of the hole, and Caveman will carefully shovel it into the wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find anything, you'll both get the rest of the day off in a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. We don't want any dirt piles to get in the way." The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendanski and Mr. Sayre, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sayre would leave to take water to the other groups of campers, but otherwise, he and the water truck stayed parked there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did as he told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by Zero as he shoveled it into a wheelbarrow, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boys' shoulders and sticking her pitchfork through the dirt piles. "You're doing fine, just fine," she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug the holes, and Zero, Armpit, and Squid shoveled the excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. After lunch, Zero took over the digging again. Stanley returned to the wheelbarrow. "There's no hurry," the warden said several times. "The main thing is not to miss anything." The boys dug until the holes were well over 6 feet deep and wide. Still, it was easier for 2 boys to dig a 6-foot hole than it was for 1 boy to dig a 5-foot hole. "All right, that's enough for today," the warden said. "I've waited this long. I can't wait another day." Mr. Sayre drove her back to the cabin. "I wonder how she knew all our names," Stanley said as he walked back to the compound. "She watches us all the time," said Zigzag. "She's got hidden microphones and cameras all over the place. In the tents, the rec room, the shower." "The shower?" asked Stanley. He wondered if Zigzag was just being paranoid. "The cameras are tiny, no bigger than the toenail on your little thumb. Little toe." Stanley had his doubts about that. He didn't think they could make cameras that small. Microphones, maybe. He realized that was why X-Ray didn't want to talk to him about the gold tube at breakfast. X-Ray was afraid the warden might have been listening. One thing was clear. They weren't just digging to build character. They were definitely looking for something. And whatever they were looking for it in the wrong place. Stanley gazed out across the lake toward the spot where he had been digging yesterday when he found the gold tube. He dug the hole into his memory. As Stanley entered the rec room, he could hear X-Ray's voice from all the way across the room. "See what I'm saying?" X-Ray said. "Am I right or am I right?" The other bodies in the room were little more than bags of flesh and bones dumped across broken chairs and couches. X-Ray was full of life, laughing and waving his arms around as he talked. "Yo, Caveman, my man," he called out. Stanley made his way across the room. "Hey, slide over, Squid," said X-Ray. "Make room for the Caveman." Stanley crashed on the couch. He had looked for the hidden camera in the shower. He hadn't seen anything. He had hoped the warden hadn't either. "What's the matter?" asked X-Ray. "You guys tired or something?" He laughed. "Hey, keep it down, will you?" groaned Zigzag. "I'm trying to watch TV." Stanley glanced uncertainly at Zigzag, who was staring very intently at the busted television screen. The warden greeted the boys at breakfast the next morning and went with them to the holes. 4 dug in the holes and 3 tended to the wheelbarrows. "Glad you're here, X-Ray," she said to him. "We need your sharp eyes." Stanley spent more time pushing the wheelbarrows than digging, because he was such a slow digger. He carted away the excess dirt and dumped it into previously dug holes. He was careful not to dump any of it in the hole where the gold tube was actually found. He could still see the tube in his mind. It seemed so familiar, but he just couldn't place it. He thought that it might have been a lid to a fancy gold pen. KB could have been the initials of a famous author. The only famous authors he could think of were Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, and Mark Twain. Besides, it didn't really look like the top of a pen. By lunchtime, the warden was beginning to lose her patience. She made them eat quickly so they could get back to work. "If you can't get them working faster," she told Mr. Sir, "then you're going to have to climb down there and dig with them." After that, everyone worked faster, especially when Mr. Sir was watching them. Stanley practically ran when he pushed the wheelbarrow. Mr. Sir reminded them that they weren't Girl Scouts. They didn't quit digging until every other group had finished. Later, as Stanley sat sprawled across the understuffed chair, he tried to think of a way to tell the warden where the tube was really found without getting himself or X-Ray into trouble. It didn't seem possible. He even thought about sneaking out at night and digging in that hole by himself, but the last thing he wanted to do after digging all day was to dig at night, too. Besides, the shovels were locked up at night, presumably so they couldn't be used as weapons. Mr. Pendanski entered the rec room. "Stanley," he called as he made his way to him. "His name's Caveman," said X-Ray. "Stanley," said Mr. Pendanski. "My name's Caveman," said Stanley. "Well, I have a letter here for someone named Stanley Yellnuts," said Mr. Pendanski. He turned over the envelope in his hand. "It doesn't say Caveman anywhere." Thanks," Stanley said, taking it. It was from his mother. "Who's it from?" Squid asked. "Your mother?" Stanley put it in his big pocket in his pants. "Are you going to read it to us?" asked Armpit. "Give him some space," said X-Ray. "If the caveman doesn't want to read it to us, he doesn't have to. It's probably from his girlfriend." Stanley smiled. He read it later after the other boys had gone to dinner. "Dear Stanley, it was wonderful to hear from you. Your letter made me feel like one of the other moms who can afford to send their kids to summer camp. I know it's not the same, but I'm very proud for you trying to make the best of a bad situation. Who knows, maybe something good will come out of this. Your father thinks he's real close to a breakthrough on his sneaker project. I hope so. The landlord is threatening to evict us because of the odor. I feel sorry for the little old lady who lived in her shoe. Must have smelled awful. Love from both of us." "What's so funny?" Zero asked. It startled him. He thought Zero had gone to dinner with the others. "Nothing, just something my mom wrote." "What'd she say?" Zero asked. "Nothing." "Oh, sorry," said Zero. "Well, see, my dad's trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers, so the apartment kind of smells bad because he's always cooking these old sneakers. So anyway, in the letter, my mom said she felt sorry for the little lady who lived in a shoe. You know, because it must have smelled bad in there." Zero stared blankly at him. "You know, the nursery rhyme?" Zero said nothing. "You've heard the nursery rhyme about the little old lady who lived in a shoe?" "No." Stanley was amazed. "How does it go?" asked Zero. "Didn't you ever watch Sesame Street?" Stanley asked. Zero stared blankly. Stanley headed on to dinner. He would have felt pretty silly reciting nursery rhymes at Camp Green Lake. For the next week and a half, the boys continued to dig in and around the area where X-Ray had supposedly found the gold tube. They widened X-Ray's hole as well as the holes Armpit and Squid had been digging, until the 4th day where all 3 holes met and formed one big hole. As the days wore on, the warden became less and less patient. She arrived later in the morning and left earlier in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the boys continued to dig later and later. "This is no bigger than when I left you yesterday," she said, after arriving late one morning, well after sunrise. "What have you been doing down there?" "Nothing," said Squid. It was the wrong thing to say. At just that moment, Armpit was returning from a bathroom break. "How nice of you to join us," she said. "And what have you been doing?" "I had to, go." The warden jabbed at Armpit with her pitchfork, knocking him backward into the big hole. The pitchfork left 3 holes in front of his shirt, 3 tiny spots of blood. "You're giving these boys too much water," the warden told Mr. Pendanski. They continued to dig until late that afternoon, long after all the other groups had finished for the day. Stanley was down in the big hole along with the other 6 boys. They had stopped using the wheelbarrows. He dug his shovel into the side of the hole. He scooped up some dirt and was raising it up to the surface when Zigzag's shovel caught him in the side of his head. He collapsed. He wasn't sure if he passed out or not. He looked up to see Zigzag's wild head staring down at him. "I ain't dig that dirt up," Zigzag said. "That's your dirt." "Hey, Mom," Magnet called. "Caveman's been hurt." Stanley brought his fingers to the side of his neck. He felt wet blood and a pretty big gash below his ear. Magnet helped Stanley up to his feet, then up out of the hole. Mr. Sir made a bandage out of a piece of his sack of sunflower seeds and taped it over Stanley's wound. Then he told him to get back to work. It isn't nap time. When Stanley returned to the hole, Zigzag was waiting for him. "That's your dirt," Zigzag said. "You have to dig it up. It's covering my dirt." Stanley felt a little dizzy. He could see the small pile of dirt. It took him a moment to realize that it was dirt that had been on his shovel when he was hit. He scooped it up, and then Zigzag dug his shovel into the ground beneath it, where Stanley's dirt had been. A little crazy. The next morning, Mr. Sir marched the boys to another section of the lake, and each boy dug his own hole, 5 feet deep, 5 feet wide. Stanley was glad to be away from the big hole. At least now he knew how much he had to dig for the day, and it was a relief not to have other shovels swinging past his face or the warden hanging around. He dug his shovel into the dirt and slowly tried to dump it into a pile. He had to make his turn smooth and slow. If he jerked too quickly, he felt a throbbing pain just above his neck where Zigzag's shovel had hit him. That part of his head between the neck and ear was considerably swollen. There were no mirrors in the camp, but he imagined he looked like a hard-boiled egg sticking out of him. The remainder of his body hardly hurt at all. His muscles had strengthened, and his hands were tough and calloused. He was still the slowest digger, but not that much slower than Magnet. Less than 30 minutes after Magnet returned to camp, Stanley spat into his hole. After his showers, he put his dirty clothes in his crate and got out his box of stationery. He stayed in the tent to write a letter so Squid and the other boys wouldn't make fun of him for writing his mother. "Dear Mom and Dad, camp is hard but challenging. We've been running the obstacle courses and have to swim long distances on the lake. Tomorrow we learn." He stopped writing as Zero walked into the tent, then returned to his letter. He didn't care what Zero thought. Zero was a nobody. "To rock climb. I know that sounds scary, but don't worry." Zero was standing beside him now, watching him write. Stanley turned and felt his neck throb. "I don't like it when you read over my shoulder, okay?" Zero said nothing. "I'll be careful. It's not all fun and games here, but I think I'm getting a lot out of it. It builds character. The other boys, I don't know how," said Zero. "What? Can you teach me?" Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. "Teach you what, to rock climb?" Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. "What?" said Stanley. He was hot, tired, and sore. "I want to learn how to read and write," said Zero. Stanley let out a short laugh. He wasn't laughing at Zero. He was just surprised. All this time he had thought Zero was reading over his shoulder. "Sorry," he said. "I don't know how to teach." After digging all day, he didn't have the strength to try and teach Zero to read and write. He needed to save his energy for the people who counted. "You don't have to teach me to write," said Zero. "Just to read. I don't have anyone to write to." "Sorry," Stanley said again. His muscles and hands were the only part of his body that had toughened over the past several weeks. His heart had hardened as well. He finished writing his letter. He barely had enough moisture in his mouth to seal the stamp of the envelope. It seemed to know that no matter how much water he drank, he was always thirsty. Chapter 19. He was awakened one night by a strange noise. At first he thought it might have been some kind of animal, and it frightened him. But as the sleep cleared from his head, he realized the noise was coming from the cot next to him. Squid was crying. "You okay?" Stanley whispered. Squid's head jerked around. He sniffed and caught his breath. "Yeah, I'm fine," he whispered and sniffed again. In the morning, Stanley asked Squid if he was feeling better. "What are you, my mother?" asked Squid. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. "I got allergies, okay?" Squid said. "Okay." said Stanley. You open your mouth again, I'll break your jaw. Stanley kept his mouth shut most of the time. He didn't talk too much with any other boys, afraid he might say the wrong thing. They called him Caveman and all that, but he couldn't forget they were dangerous too. They were all here for a reason. As Mr. Sir would say, this wasn't a Girl Scout camp. Stanley was thankful that there were no racial problems. X-Ray, Armpit, and Zero were black. He, Squid, and Zigzag were white. Magnet was Hispanic. On the lake, they were all the same reddish-brown color of dirt. He looked up from his hole to see the water truck and its trailing dust cloud. His canteen was still almost quarter full. He quickly drank it down, then took his place in the line behind Magnet and in front of Zero. The air was thick with heat, dust, and exhaust and fumes. Mr. Sir filled their canteens. The truck pulled away. Stanley was back in his hole, shovel in hand, when he heard Magnet call out, "Anybody want some sunflower seeds?" Magnet was standing at ground level, holding a sack of seeds. He popped a handful in his mouth, chewed and swallowed, shells and all. "Over here," called X-Ray. The sack looked like it to be about half full. Magnet rolled up the top, then tossed it over to X-Ray. "How'd you get 'em without Mr. Sir seeing you?" asked Armpit. "I can't help it," Magnet said. He held up both his hands, wiggled his fingers. "My fingers are like little magnets." The sack went from X-Ray to Armpit to Squid. "It's sure good eating something that doesn't come from a can," said Armpit. Squid tossed the sack to Zigzag. Stanley knew it would come to him next. He didn't even want it. From the moment Magnet shouted, "Anybody want some sunflower seeds?" he knew there would be trouble. Mr. Sir was sure to come back. And anyways, the salted shells would only make him thirsty. "Coming your way, Caveman," said Zigzag. "Airmail and special delivery." It's unclear whether the seeds spilled before they got to Stanley or after he dropped the bag. It seemed to him that Zigzag hadn't rolled it up before throwing it, and that was the reason he didn't catch it. But it all happened very fast. One moment the sack was flying through the air, and the next thing Stanley knew the sack was in his hole and the seeds were spilled across the dirt. "Oh man," said Zigzag. "Sorry," Stanley said as he tried to sweep the seeds back into the sack. "I don't eat dirt," said X-Ray. Stanley didn't know what to do. "The truck's coming," shouted Zigzag. Stanley looked up at the approaching dust cloud, then back down at the spilled seeds. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What else is new? He dug a shovel into his hole and tried to turn the dirt over and bury the seeds. What he should have done, he realized later, was knock one of the dirt piles back into the hole, but the idea of putting dirt into his hole was unthinkable. "Hello, Mr. Sir," said X-Ray. "Back so soon?" It seems like you were just here," said Armpit. "Time flies when you're having fun," said Magnet. Stanley continued to turn the dirt over in his hole. "You Girl Scouts having a good time?" asked Mr. Sir. He moved from one hole to another. He kicked a dirt pile by Magnet's hole, then he moved towards Stanley. Stanley could see the two seeds at the bottom of his hole. As he tried to cover up, he unearthed a corner of the sack. "Well, what do you know, Caveman?" said Mr. Sir, standing over him. "It looks like you found something." Stanley didn't know what to do. "Dig it out," Mr. Sir said. "We'll take it to the warden. Maybe she'll give you the rest of the day off." "It's not anything," Stanley muttered. "Let me be the judge of that," said Mr. Sir. Stanley reached down and pulled up an empty burlap sack. He tried to hand it to Mr. Sir, but he wouldn't take it. "So tell me, Caveman," said Mr. Sir, "how did my sack of sunflower seeds get in your hole?" "I stole it from your truck." "You did?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." "What happened to all the sunflower seeds?" "I ate them." "By yourself?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." "Hey, Caveman," shouted Armpit. "How come you didn't share with any of us?" "That's cold, man," said X-Ray. "I thought you were our friend," said Magnet. Mr. Sir looked up and around from one boy to another, then back to Stanley. "We'll see what the warden has to say about this. Let's go." Stanley climbed out of his hole and followed Mr. Sir to the truck. He still held the empty sack. It felt good to sit inside the truck, out of the direct rays of the sun. Stanley was surprised he could feel good about anything at that moment, but he did. It felt good to sit down in a comfortable seat for a change. And as the truck bounced along the dirt, he was able to appreciate the air blowing through the open window onto his hot and sweaty face. Alright, so we're stopping at chapter 20 today. Come here, bud. Callie was very good today. She'll probably be hired back because she didn't bother me. All right. There's no class on Monday. We'll pick this back up on Tuesday. See you guys. See ya. All right. Yep, I know.